Awesome MMA live before lock, sponsored by Prize Picks. Jason's on the road for the Bucks. I forget where the Bucks are playing this weekend, but that aside, Jason's on the road covering the Bucks this weekend. So I am filling in for him. I'm here with Pete the Heat, of course. Going to be talking about some UFC today, and one of my favorite fighters, kind of one of everybody's favorite fighters. I don't know who doesn't like Max Holloway. One of the nicest guys in the UFC, does fun interviews. Every single one of his fights is a barn burner. He always scores well for DFS. So, Pete, what really stands out to you about this card?
Yeah, Max Holloway, obviously. What's up, everybody? I love Max Holloway. Yeah, he's in my pound for pound, most like my favorite fighters of all time. I just love his entire style. I actually watched his come up into the UFC, and if you go back and you watch his early career, he had some tough fights early on. You talk about Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, but he's really rounded out into a star. His high volume offense is just absolutely like amazing for the division. I think that he's going to be a champ again. We'll have to see. I mean, Volkanovski is a very, very difficult matchup for him, but this Yair fight's interesting to me because now you have two strikers where Max can really showcase his skills, and you saw that against Calvin Kattar. Just got to be a little careful about the kicks of Yair Rodriguez, who's pretty tricky.
Yeah, I think the other thing here is I don't even know what the path to victory is for Yair in this matchup. I mean, obviously it's it's MMA, so anything could happen in terms of a knockout. But I mean, we've never really seen Max get seriously hurt. The first round against Dustin Poirier when he fought up against at lightweight, I guess you could say he was rocking that fight, but he didn't get dropped and he fought the distance. So I don't really know what the realistic path to victory is for Yair Rodriguez here. Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of saying that? Do you think that Yair does have a path to victory?
Well, there was a time where we were all worried about Max Holloway with his drastic weight cuts and his weird interviews where it seemed like he suffered a stroke and he was taking so much damage at that time. And then that kind of like disappeared. So I don't know if he fixed something with his weight cutting approach, or, he started to train a little smarter and less hard sparring or something. But yeah, I think the only path to victory for Yair, to be honest, is to catch him with a kick. Obviously, he has tricky kicks, and he has to basically make Max Holloway make a mistake of guessing where a kick's going to go. Start burying a kick low to set up a high kick or set up a liver kick or whatnot. Maybe if Max's kicking defense isn't on point, where he's not reinforcing a block, and he's kind of just being lazy about defending a kick, that's where something, if you don't pay respect to another person's striking, that's where you can, next thing you know, you're looking up at the lights. But to be honest, I don't see Yair Rodriguez beating Max Holloway. I know how good Calvin Kattar is from the New England scene, and I know how good what he does to most people in striking affairs. Completely different stylistic matchup, that Yair presents rather than Calvin Kattar. But yeah, it's tough for me to see Yair winning. Wrestling Max Holloway, good luck with that. Frankie Edgar, numerous fighters have really, really struggled to even come close to landing significant takedowns on him. So yeah, that ain't happening. The price is cheap though, Greg. And that's where like you and I are kind of talking before the show is you're enticed by maybe, playing the underdog because of the main event nature, but I really can't get behind it.
Yeah. And look, I think when we're talking about Max Holloway, I think the other question here is just going to be how much exposure we want to get to him.
Yeah.
And we could talk about the Yair spot because both of us strongly think that Max Holloway is going to win this fight. I think he's the best overall play on this slate. But is he somebody that's going to be in all of your lineups? He's in over 90% of mine.
So, no, he's not going to be. And the reason is because I went back and I kind of looked at some fights, and, for the most part, that last one against Calvin Kattar where he scored 209 fantasy points, there's no way that you cashed if you didn't have him. In some other 5-round fights, he has scored a little lower. You talk about 82 against Frankie Edgar, a loss to Dustin Poirier. He did score 77. So that's amazing because in a win, let's say he scored 107. It's just a matter of how many other fighters have amazing performances today. It's tough for me to really confidently get away from him, but I do have some lineups where I'm not completely sold on him paying off that price tag. But I mean, come on, it's Max Holloway. I don't think that this is going to be a competitive fight for most. The one thing that I could think of from an MMA perspective of how this could have slightly lower volume is how Yair Rodriguez is going to need to maintain distance and space between him and Max to get off his kicks. And maybe that results in a lower scoring affair. Whereas, Calvin Kattar was okay with getting into a phone booth boxing match against Max Holloway. But yeah, Max Holloway, don't overthink it. Play him today.
Yeah, and then one other thing that kind of concerns me about Yair in this fight. So he hasn't fought in 2 years, and the last time we saw him fight against Jeremy Stephens, so he ends up winning that fight against Stephens. I actually thought there was a good case for it to be a draw, with the third round being a potential 10-8 in favor of Jeremy Stephens. Mm-hmm. But Yair was totally gassed because of the output in that fight in the third round. And if he's gassing in the third round against Jeremy Stephens, who's not a super high output fighter, he was just kind of tired out there by some of the grappling, and just also that he had hurt Jeremy Stephens early, was trying to finish him. Like, what is he going to look like when the pace and pressure of Max Holloway is in his face in the third and fourth rounds? I think Holloway just kind of melts him like he did in the Anthony Pettis fight, where Pettis just so much volume up against the cage. He ultimately just took a knee and kind of didn't actually tap out of the fight, but essentially just, was done in that fight. I think this could play out kind of similar. Do you think that Holloway is more likely to win inside the distance or by decision?
Trying to fight Max for 25 minutes is a very, very difficult task. And if I think we're seeing the best version of Max. Like, he was so young when he made his debut into the UFC, and we've seen him mature here before our eyes. And I mean, it's tough to argue that he can't get Yair Rodriguez out of there. I mean, because I don't think, for me personally, I don't know if Yair could really take the same amount of strikes that Calvin Kattar did. And a lot of fighters, if you're facing a pressure heavy fighter, you sometimes will wilt to the pressure and the volume. And we saw that, like Anthony Pettis, notorious for losing against pressure fighters or, heavy grapplers, right? Like anybody that can really put him on his back heels to negate his offense. And I think a fighter like Max Holloway can walk down almost everybody in this division. So yeah, I think that he could get him out of there within the distance, inside the distance. So we could talk about a combination of high volume and finishing rate for Max Holloway. So yeah, don't overthink it. Play him today.
Last fight for Max Holloway. And by the way, people, even whether it's a finish or it goes to decision, Max Holloway's last fight went to decision against Calvin Kattar. Do you remember how many fantasy points he scored in that fight, Pete?
I think it was like 200, right? Like 209 or something like that.
209 with no finishes and no knockdowns, just volume based. 445 significant strikes. Max Holloway is just a steam engine, and slowly you see him picking up momentum. And then once he goes, there's just no stopping him. He just throws in combinations. Like, he's throwing like 30 punch combinations. It never stops. He had a 50-42 on the scorecard in his last fight. And once again, it was with no knockdown. So total domination against Calvin Kattar. So I think Max Holloway, the best overall play on the slate in cash games. Stack it. It's hard to find underdogs to be super confident in. And I think the Yair Rodriguez, at least for cash games, makes sense at 6,700. I am not going to be stacking this fight in GPPs. I understand the inclination to do it. And if it lands in the optimal lineup, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm just not doing it because I think there are underdogs, pretty high variance with a chance to win. But any chance at all, Pete, because I know you said you weren't doing it before we started, that you might update your lineups and get one or two stacks of the main event in your lineups?
Yeah, no, it's not happening.
Okay.
No, I mean, I'm okay with losing to stack fights for the most part, right? If there are only like a few amount of fights, say we got a ton of cancellations, that's where like stacking a fight makes a ton of sense. For cash, completely get it. What you said is absolutely accurate. I agree with it. It just makes a ton of sense. You can get to a lot of other good, talented fighters by doing that in cash. For GPP, I feel like you somewhat limit your upside if you're not really sold that Yair can be competitive. It's all a matter of what you think Yair can do in this fight. Can he win a round or two? Can he have good output? Can he try to match him? Could he possibly take him down? For me, I find some other underdogs that actually have some decent upside. It's a rough week, and I can see why stacking would make sense for a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, these underdogs, I'm not feeling it. Besides Joe Jua, who we'll get to, it's kind of ugly down there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about underdogs as we go on here. Also, we have a super chat, which I'm going to answer, but I also want to address that. Who was it that said it? So Matt M in the YouTube chat said that, hey, Max Holloway only had 82 fantasy points against Frankie Edgar. So he thinks that, hey, if this fight goes to decision, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it seems to think that if this fight goes to decision or something along those lines, Max won't score well. Here's what's different about the Frankie Edgar fight. Frankie attempted 15 takedowns to try to mix up the fight. He was only able to get Max Holloway down on one of those. So he won 1 for 15. But the significance of attempting 15 takedowns is there was just a bunch of time where Max was not able to strike because he was trying to defend takedowns from Frankie Edgar. I would be pretty surprised if outside of somebody getting hurt out of desperation shoots for a takedown, I don't think we're going to see any wrestling or grappling in this fight. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, and I love how you brought that up because it provides context to the score, right? Like you just see that box score of Max Holloway didn't do that well against Frankie Edgar. Well, styles make fights, and it takes time to defend takedowns, reverse the position, get back into the center of the cage to continue, offensively striking and whatnot. So that starts to chip away, and that's where, like what you said, is Frankie was able to slow down the fight in a certain way by attempting so many takedowns. I don't see Yair doing that. And if he does, I think it's going to be like 1 or 2, and he's going to bail on that entire strategy and then just get beat from pillar to post. If he tries to follow like the Valerie Loretta strategy, I don't know if you saw that from yesterday, where she literally shuffles around the octagon and then throws a couple strikes and then continues to shuffle for the large majority of the rounds. That's where possibly we could see Yair slow down the pace of the fight, and that result in lower volumes for both of these fighters. But yeah, I don't see that happening.
Yeah. So anyway, Max Holloway, I really like him, and he's my most rostered fighter. That is not going to change, and I'm also personally not going to be rostering Yair Rodriguez today. So any kind of crazy spinning shit that knocks out Max Holloway, that'll be the night for me. Now I want to get back to the super chat that we got a little bit earlier in the show. Brad Kaufman, just as we were starting, left us a super chat. High stakes, 33-person lineup. Thoughts on, and he's just giving out his full lineup here. So he's rostering Alvarez, Baeza, Holloway, Lee, Nzechukwu, and Yadong. So I'll start with, we're going to be going through these fighters for the most part individually, but Alvarez, you and I both talked before the show. I think he's a viable underdog play. No real issues with him there. I really love Miguel Baeza. I think the Baeza Chaos Williams fight, one of the best fights on the slate to target. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I like Miguel Baeza. That comes down to a boxer versus a brawler. I wouldn't really consider Chaos Williams to be a boxer because he's a little rough around the edges. He started to kind of take into a more calculated approach past 2 fights rather than that reckless style we saw early on. But I think Miguel Baeza checks more boxes and has the most, the more well-rounded skill set. He actually has some decent wrestling, and he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in his back pocket. So we have seen Chaos Williams get taken down at times, and I feel like that's definitely a way to negate the strength of Chaos Williams, is just put him on his back. Incorporate, low leg kicks, calf kicks, something that Miguel Baeza does really, really well. I just think it's going to be, as long as like Baeza isn't truly affected from the damage from the Santiago Ponzinibbio fight, where he was, I almost like, I forgot that it went the distance. I almost thought that he got finished because in my mind, I remember these sequences where he was getting just absolutely tooled on. But the level of competition right there, you're going from Santiago Ponzinibbio to Chaos Williams. Anytime that you're fighting a high caliber fighter, you kind of level up. And I feel like that's what we're going to see from Miguel Baeza, where he just is going to look incredible in this matchup. He has to be careful. Chaos Williams is extremely dangerous and presents crazy KO upside. So I understand that as an underdog call, but I'm with you. I like Baeza today.
Yeah, and then if Chaos Williams wins on the other side, it's almost certainly going to be by an early finish. That's generally how Chaos Williams wins. So I think that's a good fight to target both sides of, but I really like Miguel Baeza. Max Holloway, no issues there. The other 3 fighters you have in your lineup, Brad, I'm underweight to all of them. Kennedy Nzechukwu, Song Yadong, and Andrea KGB Lee. So I prefer going, I guess, which one should we start with? In terms of Song Yadong, I just don't know what his upside is at 8,500. And there's a lot of fighters that I think have finishing potential in it kind of around that pricing range. So he is, Song Yadong is priced at 8,500 on DK. Let me sort by all. Yeah,
84,
so
84.
84. Okay, so Yadong is 8,400. Miguel Baez is 8,500. I think that he has finishing equity. Ben Rothwell 8,600. I think he has finishing equity. Da Un Jung is priced right below him, and I know that you've played Kennedy and Setchko in your lineup there. You said I prefer the Da Un Jung side of that fight. And then you've got Cynthia Calvillo, who also has immense wrestling and grappling upside at 8,200. Same thing for Jung. I think Jung has potential to just take down Kennedy and Setchko like 7-8 times and submit him or just win with top control in this fight. So of these fighters, Song Yadong's my least favorite amongst Rothwell, Baeza, Yadong, Jung, Calvillo. I like all of them more than Yadong. Does that sound reasonable to you?
I don't hate Song Yadong today, but I get what you're saying. A lower weight class, more likelihood that it goes the distance. And Song Yadong has looked great, but he's been taken down at times and put on his back. Whenever you're fighting a southpaw fighter and he's fighting Julio Arce, he has to be careful. But I have like memories of Julio Arce taking a ton of damage, and he's a great boxer himself. So I feel like this could actually have some fireworks, like sequences in the striking realm. But I get what you're saying. It makes more sense. Like I'm kind of level to the field with Song Yadong. As far as that lineup mentioned in the super chat, I feel like that's a very unique lineup. I'm not really on all of those sides in one lineup. Like I've kind of like, I have my flag planted on certain fighters. I think Da Un Jung represents a great takedown upside. So like the Kenny Nzechukwu I talked about on the strategy show, I wanted to get to him because he's helped me out and he's helped us, build us out in the past where his volume, his length, and just his skill set and his strong camp are what really provide, I don't know, like glimmers of hope for me. Like I want to put him in my roster, but his takedown defense is extremely inconsistent. Same with, Andrea Lee, where they do the right thing sometimes, and a lot of times they have really, really bad tendencies, and they are both facing fighters who have great takedown upside. So anytime it's a close fight, I tend to lean towards the grappler. So Da Un Jung, I like. Cynthia Calvillo, I like. But I'm not going to talk you off your lineup. I think that's definitely a unique lineup for the tournament that you're in.
Yeah, and let's spend a little more time on the Kennedy and Setchko fight, because he has had fights where he scored well on DraftKings, but I just don't know if he's any good. And he's fought really low-level competition. So last fight against Danilo Marques, what was really concerning is that first round. Marques takes him down, gets on his back, and Setchko just has no clue what to do. And at one point, they're kind of standing up against the cage, and Danilo Marques is basically Kennedy and Setchko's holding him up against it's a position I've never seen before for an entire round, another fight. So it's kind of hard to explain if you guys hadn't seen the first round of that fight. But basically, Danilo Marques rides his back up against the cage for the entirety of the first round, and nothing happens. Significant strikes land in that round. 0 for Kennedy and Setchko, 0 for Danilo Marques, but clearly a 10-9 round for Marques, because just takes him down, controls him for that entire round. And I just worry with the overall wrestling ability of Da Un Jung. Is there going to be a situation here where Jung does not gas out? He has a much better gas tank than what we've seen out of Danilo Marques. And we just see something like what happened in his last fight, where Da Un Jung fought against William Knight. He took him down 8 times and wins a unanimous decision there. I think this fight could play out exactly the same. Choked on air there. That was, I don't know what happened there. It was a bug or something, but no, I hope not, because then you're doing the show by yourself there, and you don't have the ad reads, which that's the real concern,
just
right?
For the ad reads.
If I die, who's going to do the Prize Picks ad read and tell everybody that you get $100 deposit bonus by using the promo code Awesemo, right? Nobody to tell them that if I pass away here. But anyway, I think this fight could pay out exactly the same as the Da Un Jung William Knight fight, and I think that Jung is live for a finish on the ground too. So I don't understand the line here. -120, I bet Da Un Jung. Do you see that fight any differently?
So initially, like I said, I wanted to get to Kennedy because he's a massive guy. He's young. He's 6'5", has an 83-inch reach, which can give a lot of people fits. He's a southpaw. So I always like southpaws hold a little bit more weight just because of how tricky they are and how difficult it is to find sparring partners that are lefties and kind of match your opponent. Da Un Jung's going to be at a slight reach disadvantage at 78 inches. And basically the reason why I think the line is like that is if you go back and you look at what Da Un Jung has done in the UFC, early finish over Mike Rodriguez, Hadis Ibrahimov, very low level fighter. That fight was pretty close. Hadis Ibrahimov actually took him down, but then in the third round, Da Un Jung was able to pull off a submission. And then a draw against Sam Alvey. And I think Sam Alvey's completely underwhelming for the most part in his UFC career. So, and the William Knight one, I think holds a lot of weight to me because I know that William Knight's an explosive wrestler, very, very small stature guy for the division, but he's wide and he's muscular. And I think that's why that lateral and that outside trip were, worked in his benefit because Da Un Jung was just so massive compared to him. That takedown is going to be a little difficult to come by against a very tall fighter in Kennedy Nzechukwu. So I think what he needs to do is he needs to test the balance of Kennedy by attempting single leg takedowns. I tell my fighters all the time, I train a lot of heavyweight fighters and I say, we don't want to be underneath our opponent's hips. If we're underneath our opponent's hips, that's a lot of weight and that's where they can get behind us and put us in a terrible position. What we want to do is we want to test that balance. So we're going to snatch up single legs. And I think if he goes to the single leg, you're going to see Da Un Jung just have a massive score and he has submission finish upside. Kennedy can work back to his feet, which actually can work in our favor for takedown city. And Da Un Jung could rattle off a couple takedowns en route to a submission finish. But if he tries to stay on the outside, he probably will get picked apart from Kennedy. So I'm siding significantly with Da Un Jung, but I understand why people want to take that shot in hopes that, Kennedy pulls off a decision victory.
Yeah, and people talking about the physicality of Kennedy and Nzechukwu. Yeah, it's nothing compared to. Have you guys seen what William Knight looks like? That dude is just like one muscle. Like he is one of the more ridiculously built humans in the UFC. We've got a super chat here from Corey Randall saying, Pete, talk to him, not talk to me. It says talk to me, except I know it means him. So talk to Corey about the path to victory for Alves. We both talked about this briefly before the fight started. I think this is a pretty good one to target. Mark Chikasi versus Rafael Alves. I think the winner is potentially score pretty well. But what do you see as the path to victory for Alves in this fight?
Yeah, so I love this fight. I love targeting this fight. I feel like it's pretty sneaky. Mark Chikasi's a very, very talented fighter as well. But if you go back and you look at who he's fought, some of the fighters I would probably classify as low level. Obviously, coming off Rafael Fiziev loss, that is not a low level opponent. Lando Venata, Joe Duffy. Joe Duffy really flaked out in the UFC. Nasrat Haqparast, that's okay. But these wins, Lukasz Sajewski, he's not in the UFC. Frankie Perez, Timu Pakalan. So his victories in the UFC are against somewhat low level of competition. When Chikasi gets tired or he gets hurt, he will actually try to grapple his opponents, which I think could be a mistake here against Rafael Alves, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, former world champion, 19-10 overall. If Alves ends up on top, he has good pressure from on top. He has sneaky jiu-jitsu. He's very, very aggressive. He hits hard. I think that he can match Mark Chikasi, and coming off a very, very difficult debut fight against Damir Ismagulov, it's tough to really critique him too much. I understand that he's missed weight in the past, but he looked good this time around. When he wins big, and he'll probably get us a nice finish. But there are times when he's been, submitted or even finished, and he was finished via leg kicks against Wagner Rocha. So Wagner Rocha is definitely not a striker, former UFC fighter. But all I'm saying is I view this fight as a GPP fight. I like Rafael Alves just because I think he's hungry for a victory here. And that jiu-jitsu, I think, could pose some problems, especially if he ends up on top. And when I look at the landscape of the slate and I look down at some of these underdogs, I have no problem getting to Rafael Alves in addition to Liana Jojua. Those are kind of my 1-2 punches down there that I'm a little bit more aggressive than the field.
Yeah, let's talk about Jojua. That's another fight that I like to. I have a bet on the money line for Jojua. She could be had for plus 235 is the best line that I was able to find on her, at least when I was looking this morning and place bets. So here's what I like about Liana Jojua. There's a very clear path to victory against Courtney Casey. Courtney Casey has 38% takedown defense. And as we've seen in recent fights, when she gets on her back, she doesn't do anything. Not only does, I don't know if she doesn't have get up abilities, but she doesn't even attempt to get up. She just lays on her back. We saw that against Jillian Robertson. She gets taken down 3 times and just gets held down for the entire fight. JJ Aldridge, who isn't known as a wrestler, was able to take down Courtney Casey 4 times and had nearly 6 minutes of control time. So almost half the fight was JJ Aldridge on top of Courtney Casey, and Aldridge Let me see, how many takedowns did she have in her career before that fight? 2 in her entire UFC career before that fight. And she was able to get Courtney Casey down 4 times. So there's a very clear path to victory for Liana Jojua, who I do not think is particularly good, but she's a willing wrestler, and that's the very clear path to beating Courtney Casey. So Jojua is actually my favorite underdog play on this entire slate, and is my favorite bet just because of the path to victory.
Yeah, I'm gonna back up what you're saying, and I'll kind of give you some more stats that can kind of like solidify your faith in Jojua, which it's tough to have faith in low level women's MMA, but we see it almost each week where targeting the underdog in low level women's MMA tends to work out. And, I think that Jojua has significant upside. She is training with Merab Dvalishvili, who, if you don't know who Merab is, he is a takedown specialist, one of the best wrestlers I think we've ever seen, to be honest. You talk about Jojua, who used to compete a weight class higher. Now seems like she's, found a weight class that really suits her body type and her strength level. And Courtney Casey actually used to fight at 115 pounds. So over the years, she's bumped up a weight class, and Jojua used to, fight at a higher weight class. So now they're basically, I would give the strength advantage to Jojua. And I think that she makes a ton of mistakes, and making mistakes in women's MMA is very volatile and costly. We'll see it. People get caught in, arm bars from guard. Courtney Casey actually does have a good, active guard. I'll give her that active guard. But I agree with you in saying that she doesn't work towards her feet all that much. The control time is something that I think could really work out in our favor. So I am bullish on Liana Jojua just because of everything that I've seen negatively against Courtney Casey. You're talking about a fighter who does have 9 defeats on her record as well. So the path to victory is there from Jojua. She just needs to go there and execute it. But if you want to kind of be a little contrarian, you want to target Courtney Casey, you're just hoping that an armbar from guard or a striking affair ensues.
Yep. And that's the other thing. Like you said, I think that is probably the biggest risk on the ground for Liana Jojua. Obviously, if the fight stays on the feet, it's going to be Courtney Casey who wins.
Yeah.
If the fight ends up going to the ground, it's most likely going to be Jojua winning with top control. But with that said, we have seen low-level women's MMA fights. We joke about this all the time. The armbar from guard. Courtney Casey's last win was in May of 2020. It was an armbar from guard against Mauro Romero Barella, who took her down, then got submitted with Courtney Casey off her back. So either way, I think we just look at the overall context of this slate. Cheap fighters to roster. There aren't that many I feel great about. Jojua is one of them. I want to ask you, Pete, now, because just as we're on the topic of some of these cheap fighters,
okay,
is there anybody else that we've talked about? Alves, we've talked about Jojua. Let's see. I'll give you a price point of anything below 7,600. Anybody below that price point that you're making it a priority to get to?
Yikes. Well, Yair is kind of off the list for me. Leah Letson's another fighter that's off the list to me. I think that when you're fighting Felicia Spencer, a fighter who's fought some of the best people in the division, surprisingly lost in her last bout, but this should be a get right fight for Felicia Spencer. And I just don't see many paths to victory for Leah Letson. She needs to keep the fight on the feet. And I still feel like she'll be behind from the get-go. So it's no for Leah Letson. It comes down to Joel Alvarez and Colin Anglin. And I could kind of make a case for both of them. Joel Alvarez is a massive fighter for this division. And he has an impressive record, lots of submission finishes. But the tough part about that is you're fighting Thiago Moises, who's one of the sneakiest submission fighters out there and has one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu backgrounds. So he has to be very careful. He's 18-2 overall, and Thiago Moises is coming off a fight against Islam Makhachev, where he actually took down Islam Makhachev and looked good. He lasted longer than Dan Hooker did, and that was actually quite surprising to me because, styles make fights. I thought Dan Hooker could present some problems, but Thiago Moises has looked really, really good of late. But Joel Alvarez's frame, he is 6'3" with a 77-inch reach for the lightweight division, which is pretty massive. Colin Anglin, I think, will garner some ownership given his takedown upside. He's fighting Sean Woodson. Woodson, primarily a tree of a man, just massive for the 145-pound weight class. You know how to beat Sean Woodson. You need to replicate what Julian Erosa did, take him down, threaten him with submissions, try to control the fight, put him on his back. to avoid the volume striking of Sean Woodson. Colin Anglin's an excellent wrestler and a pretty good striker, but he's sneaky. But I don't know. I think I would actually rather take the frame of Joel Alvarez, who is 18-2 overall, and he's tricky. So I don't know, man. It's like I said, it's ugly down there, and that's really what gets me to a Jojua and Alves. I'd much rather take a shot on them than some of these other underdogs.
Yeah, I'm just for the wrestling upside. I have some interest in Anglin, and also that he's just so cheap. I find it really difficult to get to fighters or to get to some of the high upside expensive fighters like a Max Holloway unless we're punting somewhere. Right. And Anglin's somebody who just fits into it. He's the cheapest fighter that I like getting to because I certainly prefer him to Yair Rodriguez. Another thing too is we have Sean Woodson projected for nearly 40% ownership today. I don't really understand that. Okay, so I like the leverage that we're getting on Anglin as well.
Same. And I'm actually underweight just in general to Sean Woodson because he strikes a lot, doesn't have the best finishing potential. I think Anglin can match him in striking department for a little bit. It's not like how FanDuel used to be where you would get defended takedowns or takedowns defended. If that was the case, then Woodson would look even better. I just don't know. I like some other 9,000 options. Much rather get to Max Holloway. Much rather take a shot on Felicia Spencer, given her, grappling potential and finishing upside. So, it's either use Anglin as leverage or just somewhat be underweight to the fight. And that's kind of where I'm getting to. I'm a little underweight to the fight in general.
Yeah, I have more exposure to Anglin than I do to Woodson. But once again, it's a low priority fight for me overall for this reason. I don't think Anglin has the best odds of winning in the world. I just slightly prefer him to Woodson due to the price point. And number two, if you're looking at Woodson at the top, I'd rather roster Max Holloway for $100 more, or $300 more, who I think is significantly more upside and is a much safer bet to win the fight. So to me, Woodson becomes a low priority, especially when we have him projected for 40% ownership. And then Anglin, I don't want to get to him too much just because I don't think he wins, but the price point is appealing enough for me to get to him some. I want to move back to the high end of the pricing range because we talked about Max Holloway and obviously he's going to be a priority for both of us. We just talked about Sean Woodson. We don't like him all that much relative to his ownership and price. Courtney Casey, we've talked about being on Liana Jojua. So in lineups where you are not playing Max Holloway, Pete, who is it on the high end that you are getting to?
I mean, I don't know if you consider it the high end, but I like Ben Rothwell a lot. Ben Rothwell, 8,600. I think that's kind of like mixed in. It's either Ben Rothwell. I made a group over on Awesemo.com using a fantasy cruncher tool, which is an excellent tool. Helps me out a lot. I really like getting to one of the three of Holloway, Spencer, or Rothwell. I think that kind of sets you up for success for a lot of your lineups. Obviously, Thiago Moises is there, but if you look historically on what Thiago Moises has done in the UFC, tends to go the distance, has a nice submission finish over Michael Johnson, but in round one, he was getting pieced up. 51 points over Alexander Hernandez, 60 against Bobby Green, 70 against Michael Johnson, even though he got a finish, 100 against Kurt Holloway because he was offensive with his takedown. So I'm getting to Thiago Moises, but of those three that I mentioned, Rothwell, Holloway, Spencer, he's kind of like last on my list.
Yeah, that's same with me. And then Felicia Spencer, I have no clue what to make of Leah Letson. She has not fought in 3 years. She was dealing with health issues. Also, the last time we saw her fight, she was on the tough finale. She was a mass favorite against Stolyarenko, and Stolyarenko is terrible. And that was a split decision win for Leah Letson with not that much output in it. So I'm a little bit lower on Felicia Spencer due to her last couple of fights than I was, say, a year ago, where I thought she was going to have a pretty good amount of wrestling and grappling upside in a lot of her fights, but appears to be less so in some of her recent outings. But this matchup against Leah Letson, what do you think the upside is for Spencer?
I think it's huge. And the reason is because you're talking about a fighter who is coming off of some disappointing defeat. And she needs to get back on track. She's actually, if you think about it, lost to Amanda Nunes, then lost a grappling match, and then lost a split decision to Norma Dumont. So any coach is going to say, hey, we're going to need to go out there and get back to our roots. We need to get back in the win column. We need to do everything that in our power to secure a victory. So how can we do that? We need to solidify rounds with takedowns. We need to test this girl's grappling. We need to try to, replicate what we did against Megan Anderson when we debuted in the UFC of quick takedown, work towards a submission finish. In Invicta, that's what she was doing. She was taking people down and finishing relatively quickly. So like, I might even say that Felicia Spencer, I'm surprised at how cheap she is. I thought that she should be a bigger favorite, but 9,100 still 9,100. I'm extremely bullish on Felicia Spencer to get this done inside the distance.
So I'm going to throw out somebody else in here. Thiago Moises at 9,000. Yep. I really like his upside against Joel Alvarez. Do you know what Joel Alvarez's career takedown defense is?
It's not good. And a lot of times it's because he accepts it, and he likes to pull guard. And we see guard pullers or people comfortable off their back. They're fine being there. But for DFS, that's why Thiago Moises is appealing. And I'm sure you're going to, expand on that.
Yeah. So if you had to guess the actual number, and maybe because you've seen it online, you looked it up somewhere. What do you think is the actual percentage takedown defense for Joel Alvarez?
I'm probably going to say like under 20.
0%. He has successfully defended 0 takedowns successfully in the UFC. And I think Thiago Moises is a better grappler than Joel Alvarez. There is a very clear path to a submission finish for Thiago Moises, who can be had for, let me pull up the odds. Yeah. So you get Thiago Moises for up to plus 475 to win this fight by submission. I think that line is egregious. I know that a lot of people are just going to be looking at Joel Alvarez's recent fights and be like, oh, look, he submitted Joe Duffy. Joe Duffy retired after that fight. Correct. Oh, look, he submitted Alexander Yakovlev. Once again, armbar from guard in a low-level men's MMA fight. Generally more of a low-level women's MMA fight we see, but did against Alexander Yakovlev. That's not going to happen against Thiago Moises. I think that Moises wins this fight no matter where it goes. I think he wins on the feet. I think he wins on the ground. So I really like Moises by a submission plus 475. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I like it. I do like it. And there's levels. Like when you go against certain fighters or you go against certain, let's call it training partners in the gym, like you could go against a guy who's a submission specialist like Joel Alvarez, right? And then you go with a legitimate black belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. It's just a completely different level. And that's where I think a fighter in Thiago Moises can have the answers for all the threatening positions that Joel Alvarez can present. But with all that being said, Joel Alvarez does have 18 victories. So clearly he's doing something right. If you go back and you watch his regional tape, he will literally jump guard a lot. He will allow his opponents to take him down almost at will. And you're not going to bail yourself out with submissions from your back all the time, especially when you're going up against a guy who has such high caliber jiu-jitsu. So I like what you're saying there. I do like Thiago Moises to win the fight pretty handily. I will sprinkle some finishing upside because I think that betting MMA live is some of the most advantageous sports betting out there. And I highly recommend you guys do it. You need to recognize, the cardio of both fighters. Absolutely. You need to recognize momentum, body language. And if you can do that and you have an eye for it, you can be pretty successful. So I absolutely love that call. And I will be definitely sprinkling some submission finishes for Thiago Moises.
All right. And then one other fighter who I like for a lot of the same reasons. I bet a lot more props on this card than I normally would. And I have another one. I want to run some of the logic I have by you. And once again, the bet's already placed. It's in stone, right. But I'm looking for confirmation bias. We've got Big Ben Rothwell, who to say he's a veteran is an understatement. He is 39-13, his professional fighting record. That is an absurd amount of experience. But also, he's going up against Marcos Rogério de Lima. Do you know how Marcos Rogério de Lima has lost his last 5 losses? Do you know how they've come?
Yeah, submission finishes, just getting finished out of there. And Ben Rothwell has some of the best chokes in the business. Sneaky chokes.
Ben Rothwell plus 425 to win by submission.
Makes no sense.
Exactly. So this is another one I look at. It's like I'm almost like, is there a trick here? Like, what is there something I'm missing? And I did actually, this was something like I was taking a shit yesterday morning. I'm looking on the Twitter, just looking at numbers, and I'm like, am I missing something here? Why are these numbers what they are? It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm looking at the stats page for Marcos Rogério de Lima. I'm looking at Ben Rothwell. I'm like, all right, Ben Rothwell's a decent sized favorite in this fight. And every single one of Marcos Rogério de Lima's losses are by submission against Alexander Romanov in 2020. Loses by that weird forearm choke. Stefan Struve, arm triangle. Ovince St. Preux, Von Flue choke. If you get Von Flue choke, pretty good indication you're not a very good defensive grappler. Against Ante Gulov, guillotine choke. Against Nikita Krylov, gets rear naked choke. And then you look at Ben Rothwell, he's won 3 of his last 5 fights by submission. So Rothwell, there's another bet that I've really liked by sub plus 425. Does why do you think the line is what it is?
I don't know. I will tell you that, in comparison to other sports. I feel like there's such an edge betting MMA. I don't know if they lack like some of the best minds in the business, but clearly they don't have us over there helping them. So I think that's where we could take advantage of this. Ben Rothwell can hit and hurt people and then snatch up a neck. He has a very, very sneaky guillotine choke. And Marcos Rogério de Lima does have a limited gas tank, which I think could lead to him leaving his neck out there and getting somewhat desperate at times, which he just wants a way out. And I think a guy of Ben Rothwell's caliber, it's a massive step up in competition for De Lima, who used to fight a weight class lower, now fighting one of the biggest staples in the heavyweight division of all time. Rothwell's aging. He's a veteran, but I fully expect him to make light work of Rogério de Lima. Rogério de Lima he looked good in his past fight against Maurice Green, but he was landing takedowns, getting top position, so that when he was in top position, he could rest. And I don't think a guy in Ben Rothwell is going to let you rest. So I really like that prop bet. It's a bad line. It's a bad line. It should be like plus 200 or something like that. What it's at right now is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I actually had it written down that I would have lined it at plus 220 because once again, there's still Ben Rothwell's old. There's finishing equity for Marcos Rogério de Lima. It's a good GPP fight to target because Rogério de Lima, and also I think Matt in the YouTube chat brings up a good point here where he had said, Matt M, Lima quits when he isn't facing a bum. He just has limited cardio though, and he's kind of aware of that. So last fight against Maurice Green, it goes to decision. He wins pretty easily and doesn't tire in that fight. The reason he didn't tire, he lands 14 significant strikes. He takes Maurice Green down and just lays on top of him with no resistance. It's pretty easy to not get tired. Basically every other fight we've seen from Rogério de Lima, he goes out, he goes for a finish in the first few minutes. He doesn't get the finish. He's like, hey, all right, we'll live to fight another day, and ends up kind of, quitting a little bit, gets taken down, submitted. I think there's a pretty clear path to victory for Ben Rothwell that goes like that. So plus 425, I like there on a Ben Rothwell. Which fights have we not talked about, Pete, that are integral parts of your lineups today?
Well, let's talk about that Cynthia Calvillo Andrea Lee fight, because I think the price point's interesting. Each week we always talk about how it's very difficult to get away from that 8,200, 8,000 fight. I think Cynthia Calvillo presents sneaky takedown upside, and I don't even really know if it's too sneaky. If you go back to her regional tape and even in the UFC, when she decides to wrestle, she has success. She has landed some good takedowns against some decent opposition. Jessica Eye, when you're able to take down Jessica Eye, 4 of 7 attempts, yes, that's a 5-round fight. But when she decided to do it, she was able to match the strength of Jessica Eye and take her down, get in top position. She has some sneaky jiu-jitsu as well. Marina Rodriguez is another one that, she's like one of the hottest fighters in the UFC right now, looking amazing, doing well. When you're able to take her down to nullify what she does best and get away from that striking, I like it. Andrea Lee does not have the best takedown defense. And I understand that, looking at her record, it's tempting to get to her a lot. I have some lineups with her coming off a submission victory over Anthony Shevchenko, one of the, I'll say, most disappointing fighters in the UFC, especially in women's MMA. I think that could actually balloon her ownership a little bit and give us, a nice fighter in Cynthia Calvillo, who should look to get back into the win column. I mean, a lot of people were even picking her to beat Jessica Andrade, which I thought was absolutely crazy because I really like Jessica Andrade in that fight. Losing to Caitlin Chookagian is tough because she's just a tricky fighter to deal with on the outside with her striking. But if she goes the grappling route here against Andrea Lee, I think that there's pretty decent upside. Would you agree that, I'm getting to this fight. I like Cynthia Calvillo. She's kind of like my A side here, but I'd probably say like 20% of my lineups does have Andrea Lee just in case.
I'm not really getting to a lot of Andrea Lee. And the one thing about her is, like we talked about, it's pretty slim pickings on the cheaper end of the pricing range. So any lineups I'm getting to her, it's not because I really think that she's that likely to win. And if she wins, I don't even think she scores all that well. But it's more so that there aren't that many cheap fighters to like. But I'm underweight to Andrea Lee, and Calvillo is actually one of my most rostered fighters on the card just because of the wrestling and grappling upside. She scores really well in her wins in general. The one thing that does get a little concerning, though, she has some shit game plans for some of her fights. We were talking about how bad Courtney Casey's takedown defense is. And just earlier about how she is, I forget exactly the number because on the page of it, but it was like 38% takedown defense. Almost all her fights, she just gets when she loses, she gets taken down, held there, and just no way to get back up. A very capable wrestler and grappler in Cynthia Calvillo fights Courtney Casey, doesn't attempt takedowns. She ends up winning the fight a striking decision. But you look at that and it's like, and I remember being very exposed to her in DFS that day, and she was fairly low owned, and just being like, what are we doing here? She won the fight, which, all right, that's all well and good, but you're just ignoring your easiest path to victory. So my biggest concern here is just what is her game plan going to look like? Because it's been a disaster at times.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes to show you that you need good minds in your camp. She struggled with consistency within training camps and finding a coaching staff that really will benefit her style. It comes down to, right, like we can lay it all out where fighters have certain paths to victory, but I'll tell you, when you're in there under the lights and you're dealing with the pressure and the pace and all that, sometimes, like we say, game plans get thrown out the window all the time. And the best path to victory doesn't even really present itself because you're just so focused on trying to neutralize what the hell is happening. I will say that I like Cynthia Calvillo quite a bit. And, Greg, we got 400 people in here. If you guys could hit that like button, get us over to 150 likes. We got about, 5 to 10 minutes. So shoot your questions into chat. And I can't wait for this fight card.
Yeah. And we've gone through pretty much all the fights now. So once again, like Pete said, if you guys have questions, fire them at us and we will be able to answer your questions as you guys are finalizing and setting your lineups. Also, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys are not familiar with Prize Picks, head on over to this site, make your first deposit using the promo code AWESEMO, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Now, I'm going to go over to Prize Picks right now, and I'm just going to look at some of the props here, and I'm going to get some quick reactions from you, Pete, and just tell me if you'd be on the over or the under of these. Because the first one here that stands out to me, Max Holloway, 145.5 significant strikes. Is it crazy that I kind of like the over, not just a little bit, I like the over 145.5, a good amount for Max Holloway?
No, I like it. It just comes down to, can Yair take that many shots? I will say yes. I think that he'll be tough enough to last at least 3 rounds. And I think that's enough for Max to really reach that level.
Yeah, some recent wins for Max Holloway. Calvin Kattar, like I said, 445 significant strikes. The one against Frankie Edgar, 129. But also keep in mind, like we said, were 15 takedown attempts for Frankie Edgar in the fight to slow the pace down. So that was something that happened there against Brian Ortega. That was a finish. He still lands 290 significant strikes. 3rd round finish against Jose Aldo. He lands 174 significant strikes. Just crazy output for Max Holloway. And like you said, I think this really comes down to how much punishment can Yair Rodriguez ultimately take. Looking at some of the other numbers here. This is actually one fight we didn't talk about. Song Yadong against Julio Arce. Yeah. Song Yadong, 70.5 significant strikes. Win or lose, I like the over on 70.5 significant strikes for Song Yadong. I think this is a fight that's fairly likely to go the distance and should be fought primarily standing up. I think there is a chance that Yadong attempts some takedowns at some point, but it's not something he does all that frequently. And there is a 93% takedown defense for Arce. Yadong only lands 0.49 takedowns per 50 minutes. So maybe he attempts to take down and mix it up. But I think this fight primarily takes place on the feet. Both of them are fairly high output strikers. So I'm going to take the over on significant strikes for Yadong, although this isn't really my favorite DFS fight. But what do you make of this fight and that 70.5 number for Yadong?
Yeah, so just to kind of provide some stats to back it up, I would say over as well. In the Casey Kenny fight, his last fight, he threw 257. Kyler Phillips, he threw 161. Marlon Berry, he threw 201. So I definitely foresee this being a fight on the feet, and I will definitely take the over in that situation.
Yeah, and once again, it's a win or lose situation. I think if we're expecting this fight to play on the feet, I think that it's something where the both of them, even if the winner doesn't score exceptionally well, I think we could see both of them in the neighborhood of, like 80 to 90 significant strikes. I think it's going to be competitive. I know you mentioned a little bit that you liked Yadong maybe a little bit more than me earlier. Are you getting Julio Arce at all on this slate?
No, I mean, I get it. He's a extremely talented underdog coming from Tiger Schulman's knocked out Andre Ewell, has definitely some KO upside, but he also takes a ton of damage. He's pretty well-rounded, has a submission skill set as well. So Julio Arce, I think, is one of the sneakiest fighters on the card, but I'm not confidently putting him in my lineups. I think if he goes the grappling route, that's where he could actually have some better success against the fast Song Yadong. Yeah, I don't know, man. I get it. He set 7,800. It's ugly down there underneath 8,000. It's just like, even in a victory, where he scored a knockout win over Andre Ewell, he only scored 87 points in a second round finish. In a third round finish over Julian Erosa, 89. So if it's a low scoring slate, he could definitely come through. But I'm not really seeing that. I think Song Yadong's kind of leveling up and getting better, and he's going to, be a force within the division for some time.
All right, one more prize picks pick, and then I'll look at all the questions that everybody sent to us. We'll accumulate them. We'll answer them to close out the show. Courtney Casey, over under 85.5 fantasy points. That is the easiest under on the board for me. Courtney Casey, I mean, I know that Liana Jojua, maybe not the best striker in the world. If she's able to implement any kind of wrestling game plan, even in a win, Courtney Casey is not going to score very many points. So Courtney Casey, if she loses, she's obviously not scoring 85.5 points. If she wins, I still don't think she's probably scoring 85.5 fantasy points. So give me the under 85.5 for Courtney Casey. She's my least favorite pay up option today.
Yeah, I'm not really behind Courtney Casey, and it comes down to us having a decent amount of faith in Jojua. So I agree with you on that.
All right, let's see. What do we have for questions? And this is actually kind of related to that Jojua fight. We had somebody in the YouTube chat asked if we were at all concerned about Jojua missing weight. Not really. If anything, I actually think that benefits Jojua here to have a little bit of size. As is, she's already going to be way bigger, at least weight-wise, we would think, than Courtney Casey, just like you were talking about before, Pete, which I thought was a good point. Courtney Casey moving up in weight, Jojua going down, then Jojua also misses weight. She could have like 20 pounds on her or something like that in this fight. When you also consider the low weight class, I don't think it's an issue. It's not like she looked massively drained. It was just she didn't make weight, but it wasn't to the point where it was like it wasn't like a point where she's on the scale like shaking and you're concerned for her health. She just didn't make weight. So I actually think if anything, it's a positive for her.
Yeah, I think there was a time period where fighters who missed weight were actually pretty successful in the UFC, barring that it wasn't a drastic, terrible cut. And especially if you see a wrestler or a grappler or a fighter with intentions of grappling miss weight, it's almost strategic at times. And it's almost like, well, I don't want to zap myself, and I'll take the fine and I'll be able to go in there and solidify takedowns a little bit more. And then you combine that with working with Merab Dvalishvili. So I'm not really putting too much weight into the weight miss. Obviously, if this enters the third round, we'll have to possibly get a little worried.
All right. And now a super chat from Brad Kaufman, who's saying Jojua or Lee. Well, in that situation, it's Lee for me because these are two fighters that are priced massively different. So I have more exposure to Jojua. But if I'm just saying who's the better play between the two of them, there's no salary considerations, then I'm going to Andrea Lee. Is that something you agree with?
I mean, I think the upside, it depends on what he's in, right? Like if you're in a GPP, I think that Jojua has more upside. So I'll probably still say Jojua, and the salary relief can actually help you in certain areas. So I will lean Jojua, but I understand your thinking on that.
Also, I think we could still make a case for Jojua over Lee in tournaments cash games. So I would just say Lee because she's still a little bit more likely to win in my opinion. We also have questions in our premium, or a question in our premium Discord chat. If anybody else has questions, at me, at Pete, and we will get to them in the last few minutes here before we sign off. Scott Dradamus is asking Woodson and Chaos Williams or Baeza and Dawood Jung. That is Baeza and Jung for me.
Same.
All right, let's see. Any other questions in here that I have missed as we were going on? Nope. And let's see in the YouTube chat if we have any questions in here. Williams as Patrick Reed, probably not the golfer, probably a different one. Williams as captain, so FanDuel related question, or maybe it's the captain showdown mode over on DK. What do you think of Chaos Williams as a captain today, Pete?
I really like Baeza's skill set. I think that of the underdogs, Chaos Williams does present some good upside, and he has been in some competitive fights against Semmelsberger, Michelle Pahea, but in that fight against Michelle Pahea, you did see he can get taken down. So I'm not totally sold on that, as especially for captain. You need a lot to go right, but the upside's massive.
Yeah, I think for FanDuel purposes, I probably wouldn't play Chaos Williams at the MVP spot. If you're talking about the captain for the DraftKings contest, number one, that doesn't have all the fights on it. It's a smaller contest. So there's a little bit less people to choose from. The other thing too is, there's the salary, there's the salary multiplier also, where if you're able to play Chaos Williams, if you're playing Chaos Williams and the captain over on DraftKings, he's a cheaper salary. And it could be difficult to pay up for Max Holloway, who's obviously Max Holloway is the preferred MVP choice on FanDuel. He's the preferred captain choice on DraftKings. FanDuel, the pricing is less of an issue, but on DK, where you have to pay 1.5x his salary, it's a little tricky to get up there, but less of a concern. And I think if you're looking at upside for cheap fighters, Chaos Williams is one of the cheap fighters with the most upside on the slate. And let's finish with this, Pete. Which fighters priced under 8K do you think have the most upside? Because I do think Chaos Williams is one of them, just because his path to victory is likely a knockout. So who are your 3 highest upside fighters under 8K for today?
I will have to say Jojua, Alves, and Joel Alvarez.
Ooh, Joel Alvarez. I am going with Chaos Williams, Liana Jojua. But my other one, I think, is going to be Marcos Rogerio de Lima, even though I've really favored Ben Rothwell to win this fight, and I think he's a better DFS play. If Rogerio de Lima wins, chances are it's probably going to be in a pretty good score, with a pretty big score. Just last few wins for Marcos Rogerio de Lima: 106 fantasy points, 107, 79. That one was a little weaker, but then 94 and 129. When he wins, he generally tends to score well. So who knows? Ben Rothwell has been in 52 pro fights. He's a million years old. It wouldn't be totally shocking if at some point he comes undone. So those are the 3 fighters under 8K that I have the most upside, I think, for tournaments. Any other closing thoughts that you want to get in here for the slate today, Pete? We start in a minute.
Yeah, no, good luck, everybody. And hopefully we're on the correct side on some of these fights, but as long as you split exposure or target the correct ones, I think it will come out pretty, in a good position. So good luck, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And I will be back on Thursday, of course.
Yep. And do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We still have the NFL strategy show coming up. That will be hosted by me. We have a Prize Picks NFL show, NBA Deeper Dive, and NBA Live for Lock, which will also be hosted by me. So stick around, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and catch all those shows.